Hello dear viewers of my channel, this is a new part of your favorite manhwa. Here is a guy who was lucky enough to be in this video. If you also want a chance to get in the video, then write something in the comments. Enjoy the video. In the evening at the main character's estate, the queen sat at the table and stared intently ahead. While Lloyd's parents seemed to be beyond excited, they were pouring in their own sweat. Lloyd himself was in such a state for the first time in his life. He seemed incapable of saying a word. While the queen sipped her tea in silence and seemed completely calm, she began to tell that the tea was really delicious, and asked where her new mother had gotten the leaves. Such words shocked the poor girl, who still couldn't believe that the queen was her son's wife. She began to shout with all her might that she had not stolen the tea leaves, while her husband tried to calm her down, for she was talking a lot of nonsense because of her excitement. The man himself started shouting that he was the person who stole the tea leaves. The protagonist asked his parents to calm down and began to say that he would tell everything, after which the queen made a gloomy look and asked if Lloyd was going to tell about how he tricked the queen into agreeing to the marriage. Parents turned pale with fear. After the words that the girl said, they silently fainted, for such words meant that this was the day when they would be finished. The protagonist began to say that his parents would calm down, and then began to confess that the engagement was just a pretext. The parents fell out of the world again, unable to react in any way, while Lloyd looked at Xavier and mentally questioned what he had come up with in bringing the queen to his house. Xavier looked at his lord carefully, seeming to understand his worries, and then turned away indifferently, making Lloyd even more worried, for he could not understand what was going on. While the queen said that enough jokes from now on, and said that she would tell the whole truth, the parents listened attentively to the story that Lloyd had to take away one treasure of their empire, which was a gift from the holy dragon, and then the queen told that the dragon met the hero and asked him how he dared to have this treasure, because he was not of royal blood. Then the parents heard the words that Lloyd had lied about being the queen's husband and that he belonged to the royal family. The parents of the protagonist seemed to fall out of this world. They were in a distant space, thinking that after the explanation became much worse. The queen began to say that Lloyd needed to answer for lying to the most holy dragon. While the father of the protagonist realized that a terrible punishment was about to await them all, he began to shake and say that for such a transgression, they cannot atone even by death. While the queen looked at the man with a cold-blooded look, the protagonist also looked at his father, who instantly fell to his knees and began to say that Lloyd is dear to him as a son, and began to beg not to kill the guy. Lloyd was shocked by these words and didn't understand what was going on. While his mother began to beg the queen for mercy for the protagonist, Lloyd instantly started running to his parents, screaming for them to stop. He started telling the queen that it wasn't his parents' fault and he alone should be punished for his actions. The father started yelling at his son, saying that the parents should be responsible for the misdeeds of their children, while Lloyd didn't understand this, and then he was about to tell them that he was not the son of these people, when suddenly the queen started talking about being stuffy, and added that she had heard that Lloyd was mentally broken, and then she started smiling because as soon as there is a challenge, he starts fighting again to the end. Lloyd listened attentively to the queen's words that she wasn't going to kill him, and then she was silent for a while. Then looking Lloyd straight in the eye, she said that she wanted to make their engagement real. Lloyd couldn't fully comprehend the words he had just heard. And then with the stupidest face he could make in this situation, he asked her what she had said. She immediately slapped the stupid guy with anger and then repeated that she wanted Lloyd to be her husband and part of the royal family. The parents heard the queen ask Lloyd to work with her for the kingdom, while the protagonist refused the offer with the most indifferent look. The parents were shocked by their son's refusal and listened to them and the queen arguing about it. But in the end the girl sighed and suggested a compromise. She told them about the angel who had ordered them to give the Eye of the Summer to Lloyd, and that two groups of counselors had formed, those who were against it and those who were in favor of giving the eye. Lloyd didn't understand what was going on, because he had nothing to do with the angel doing something like that. Xavier stood silently looking at the uncomprehending protagonist, and then he turned away, pretending he didn't care what was going on. The protagonist didn't know what to say, because he didn't see a way out and just kept falling deeper and deeper. Lloyd thought about the fact that he should have looked for a solution because he just had to cope. The protagonist thought that he was not the only one who had to do something. Then he found himself together with his loved ones and realized that only with their help he could do something. The queen looked carefully towards Lloyd, waiting for his answer, while the protagonist with the most confident look declared that he would calm all the chaos. The boys set off towards the dragon to return to the queen's house. The protagonist thought that there must be a solution to the problem and that he should take care of his health first. The boy looked back at his parents, who were very happy that their son was finally back to normal, while on Lloyd's face there was sadness that he was not the native son of these good people. The protagonist began to smile, thinking that he would protect his new mother and father. While the queen also turned towards Lloyd's parents, they didn't seem to understand why this was happening, and a moment later their faces were frozen in shock at what they saw in front of them. The queen herself bowed to them to show them her respect, and she quietly said that they would see each other again very soon, addressing them as father and mother. This surprised the poor parents very much, while the protagonist seemed not to feel very well. As the palace was filled with unbelievable screams, people began to fight among themselves. They were very angry because they had different opinions. Suddenly the doors to the council chamber opened with great force. The protagonist in his manner announced that the culprit of all their troubles had arrived on the scene. A little while later, on a clear day in the castle, Lloyd was sitting on a chair in a dark room and seemed to be waiting for something, when suddenly there was a light that fell on the guy's body, after which the man announced that at this very moment an emergency meeting of the council begins and that they will decide whether they should fulfill the will of the heavens. Count Altaz raised his hand and was then given the floor, whereupon the man announced that they had missed the clause in the title of the meeting that they would decide the fate of the Eye of Summer. While another counselor sat there not knowing what to say, he repeated the same thing but added the subject of the Eye of Summer to the whole thing. One of the counselors started to shout that this was nonsense, but he was interrupted saying that he could only speak after raising his hand. He did so and then started talking about how they were just wasting their time trying to name this meeting. He started yelling that their meeting should definitely include the word great, while the counselor changed the title again. One of the counselors started yelling at the others, for it really was a waste of time. While the others yelled that their meeting should have a decent title, they continued to bicker amongst themselves with no chance of finding a solution to the dispute. The protagonist, on the other hand, felt this silly atmosphere and thought about the fact that part of something like this was native to him, whereupon a smile appeared on his face and he was about to start processing these counselors. After a while, it was deep into the night, the counselor started saying an incredibly long name, which told me that they were still only concerned with picking a name. One of the men started shouting that they had to fulfill the angel's message, because it was mandatory. He continued to shout that the right thing to do was to follow the will of heaven. One of the advisors turned to the protagonist, asking if there were any guarantees that Lloyd would not use the artifact for his own good. The protagonist began to say that he, as a loyal servant of the queen, would not dare abuse the relic. Then the protagonist began to say that if the neighboring countries attacked, he would not be able to accept it. The advisors began to leave, thinking that everything was solved, while Lloyd began to shake and talk about the fact that he has a huge responsibility, because if they oppose the will of heaven, they will be unhappy. All the counselors started shouting for Lloyd to make his decision, while the guy started shouting that he just can't make such hard decisions and that he won't do it. A moment later the counselors started fighting each other with all their might. Then Lloyd said that he had a great idea. All the counselors instantly turned their attention to the guy. The protagonist started talking about how the angelic message has unknown risks, while the loss of the artifact is a specific threat. Then he said that the loss of such an item is tantamount to weakening the country. The protagonist started talking about how if he had another artifact that could replace the Eye of Summer, everything would be easier. All the advisors listened attentively to what Lloyd had to say next. The protagonist told about the mountain range which was on the border of the kingdom, and it was very difficult to trade with other countries. Because of it they had to make a huge detour. The protagonist announced that they were very helpful to small countries because of it. Then Lloyd said that he could build a trade route through the ridge. The protagonist began to talk about how their kingdom would gain incredible wealth. All the advisors accused the hero of trading on royal honor. They began to listen intently about the vast amount of money that would flow to them. Then with an incredibly greedy look he said that the advisors could get their share of the profits as well. The counselors were instantly confused and excited about the new opportunity. Moments later the man announced that the council unanimously confirmed the transfer of the Eye of Summer to the protagonist. Lloyd was pleased that he had gotten what he wanted so easily, while Xavier remarked that he got the feeling that Lloyd knew politics better than construction. The protagonist started talking about how it's normal for politicians to be in a fight, but as soon as they make a profit, they instantly become best friends. Xavier starts talking about how money is always connected to power. A little while later, Lloyd arrived at the Queen, who gave the go-ahead for the construction, and the boy thanked the girl. The Queen didn't understand how this was possible, as they had been trying to build a trade route since ancient times. But because of the harsh conditions, everything was in vain. The Queen also began to say that it would be very difficult to go that way, while the protagonist began to say that they would use the railroad, which would allow them to transport goods perfectly. The protagonist remembered that in his world they also used the mechanics that Lloyd was going to use. He imagined the train moving down the mountain and how it could change its motion. The Queen began to say that Lloyd had always thought outside the box and she believed in his abilities, but she really wondered if it was possible to put a train on such a narrow peak. The protagonist began to say that in any case it will be difficult. For this reason he will try to choose the most flat area. The Queen accepted all the words of the guy and said that she intended to move on to another question. She asked how Lloyd plans to cross the land of demons which were on top of the mountain, and on this Lloyd began to smile, and then with the most confident look stated that he has a great plan. A while later, Lloyd and Xavier were traveling at great speed on the dragon. The protagonist asked what Xavier knew about demons, and he said that he had only heard about them from legends. He said that demons lived on the ridge, and all he could add was that demons eat people, leaving the protagonist to think that he had wandered into a place that was not written about in the novel. The dragon continued to move at breakneck speed, while the boys seemed to see something right in front of them. It turned out they had arrived in the land of demons, which was called Credos. Xavier started talking about how it was not going to be easy for them and asked what Lloyd's plan was, while the protagonist started shouting madly that his plan was to invade. Xavier grinned at Lloyd while thinking about how cruel Lloyd was. The protagonist began to laugh, thinking that they had managed to defeat both demons and angels, and that these enemies would be defeated as well. Then the dragon began to spew a huge amount of flame, which instantly destroyed a section of the strong vortex, after which they were able to get inside at great speed. There they found themselves in a completely different climatic conditions. The protagonist thought that he expected from this place exactly something darker than what he now saw in front of his eyes, namely the incredibly beautiful fields that enveloped a vast tract of land. Xavier announced that he had seen a demon. While the demons themselves were very frightened, they started screaming that they had seen a human and started crying tears of fear. Lloyd started yelling at the little girl demon for crying at the sight of him, thinking it was because of his appearance. Thank you so much to everyone who watched it to the end. If you liked it, please give it a like and check out the other manhwa I've released on the channel as it's really interesting. Thanks again. See you all soon.